Intrude is a first-person shooter released on Steam in 2016 and was a project made entirely by one man named Michael Krubba. Excuse the pronunciation. This appears to be the only game he's made at the time of this writing, and is an example of the recent indie game push to create first-person shooters in the same vein of the classic 90s titles. Intrude describes itself as being inspired by Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, and while the latter doesn't seem to have provided much of an insight on the game, the former is very clearly the game's driving influence. From the completely vertical level layouts, the maze-like design, and some other details here and there, Intrude seems very akin to the first Wolfenstein first-person shooter. How does it stack up to the legendary id Software classic? Let's give it a shot and find out. The basic premise of Intrude is that a terrorist group has taken over an abandoned military base, and you play as the only dude bad enough to go in and take them all out. What are the motivations of the terrorists? Who cares? Who are you playing as and what are their stakes in the conflict? Completely irrelevant. This is a manly game for manly men. We don't need any of that yellow-bellied story nonsense. You're a tough shoot-bang guy who will go in and shoot at the bad guys until they die. That's all the plot needs, because it's really just an excuse to get the ball rolling at the end of the day. The soundtrack for Intrude is composed by one Michael Kinnader. Excuse the pronunciation once again. And if this LinkedIn profile is accurate, it appears he is a Swedish composer. His soundtrack, if I had to sum it up quickly, sounds like it could have been an older Bobby Prince MIDI score given a modern update. In short, it's exactly the kind of music that a game like Intrude needed. Visually, the game ran very smoothly during my playthrough, and the sprites were easily differentiated from one another. Although this is due more to the color coding rather than model detail. The color palette is less varied for the levels themselves, considering that they're all just made up of grey blocky corridors. Wolfenstein 3D has a similar issue, but at the very least that game had different shades of blue with other colors occasionally thrown into the mix. With Intrude, you get grey always. Finally getting away from the aesthetics of the limited plot, we can discuss where Intrude shines, its actual gameplay. As mentioned previously, it's styled like early 90s shooters and its core mechanics reflect this. The player can hold all 5 of the game's weapons at once, the levels are completed by running around mazes to collect red, blue, and yellow keycards, and the tried and true health and armor system is present. In fact, the game has the health overcharge mechanic pulled right from 2 other Wolfenstein games, the New Order and the Old Blood. Yeah, we don't talk about the new Colossus here. Bethesda would probably prefer if we didn't too. Darker shame, darling, darker shame. The player can collect small health drops to give them a health bump above 100. This number will decrease by itself over a short period of time, but it gives the player a temporary defensive boost in the meantime. The gunplay itself is perfectly fine, and about as satisfying as the system in Wolfenstein 3D. The game rewards quick reflexes, keeps ramping up the challenge steadily over the course of Intrude's 15 levels, and the weapons never feel as if they're underpowered for what the player finds themselves up against. The weapons themselves are all genre standard, with a knife, a pistol, a shotgun, a minigun, and a rocket launcher, and they all do their job well enough. However, the game does have some occasionally wonky hit detection, with enemies able to shoot you through walls every now and then. This is a minor gripe at best, and is by no means a deal breaker. Of the 5 enemies present in Intrude, 2 of them deal hit scan damage, and also happen to be the most common foes in the game. Well beyond the baton guy, of course. The game negates the usual issues with hit scanning enemies, how they can deal seemingly unavoidable damage in open spaces, by designing levels as generally enclosed corridors with enough twists and turns to give the player enough cover for some good old-fashioned stop and pop action. Speaking more generally, the rogues gallery of Intrude is actually fairly interesting, with many of them being analogous to those from Wolfenstein 3D. Take a shot every time I mention that game. You'll die of liver failure. The baton guy is just like the dogs, the green guy is kind of like the brown shirt, the purple guy is like the blue SS, and the projectile firing robot is vaguely similar to the Hitler Goes Seth game's conclusion. Now, unlike other classic shooters, Intrude has no run option available, but the default movement speed is fast enough for this to not be an issue. As mentioned prior, the game has 15 levels, 14 regular ones and a final boss finale, and these are segmented into 3 different episodes, so to speak. The episodes feel remarkably similar to one another, unfortunately, due to all the levels looking exactly the same. It also doesn't help that this game borrows the labyrinthine level design from Wolf 3D as well, meaning that the samey appearance of everything only compounds to create levels that can be annoying to navigate. This is somewhat alleviated by an incredible blessing in disguise, being how unlike Wolfenstein 3D, every door the player opens will always remain open, so at the very least the game provides something of a breadcrumb trail for you to leave behind. The highlight of Intrude for me was most certainly the final boss. Usually the boss fights in first-person shooters are fairly mundane tasks, but the one here does something fun. It's a simple fight, based entirely around telegraphed attacks that need to be dodged in one of two, potentially three ways. You need to take cover behind one of the four pillars inside the arena to avoid the minion attack, you can either take cover from or dodge the projectile-based energy attack, and you have to bob and weave around the rocket barrage in an open space to stop the explosives from destroying your cover, rendering you vulnerable to the other attacks. The fight rewards reflexes and pattern recognition from the player, and in some ways is reminiscent of the fights from the Punch-Out games. The ending you receive is based on the amount of secret orbs you've collected throughout the game. However, considering that the plot is basically an unnecessary addition to the game, hunting down the secrets really doesn't have any reward to incentivize the task. Unless you're a stickler for Steam achievements, assuming you even got the game off Steam at all, these can just be ignored. Intrude has two bonus game modes that allow you to replay the game with new features. One has all weapons fire rockets instead of their standard ammo types, and the second is along the same lines but replaces rockets with the blue energy projectiles. Personally, I prefer the latter to the former, as the ability to theoretically dodge every attack by swerving around what's thrown at you is a more interesting challenge, but both additions are very much welcome. In the end, Intrude is a damn fine successor to Wolfenstein 3D. It plays very much like a smoother version of that classic, and fixes many of the issues present within it. To be fair though, it fixes these issues while also providing its own fair share of new flaws. When taking into consideration that this is the first game created by someone on their own, however, Intrude is a very impressive initial effort, and for the low asking price that one can pick it up for, is highly recommended.